we know where this story's going. Oh, hopes might be high as the Rings of Power launches its new season. The elves have some nifty new pieces of jewelry. The ring's primary designer is about to get a seemingly angelic helper. And while the strange bearded gentleman who fell from the sky last season still doesn't know who he is, he's not dead at least. And that's an encouraging thought. But we know that the evil Sauron is still hard at work on his own schemes. The creation of his One Ring and his Tower of Barad-dûr can be just around the corner, and those 6 Peter Jackson movies can't be far behind. Hi, and welcome to the Plugged In Show. I'm Paul Acey, filling the host chair again this week. And what a week it's shaping up to be. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power begins its 2nd season on Amazon's Prime Video, August 29th. Kennedy Unthank and I have seen its first 3 episodes and will unpack them with the help of fellow Tolkien fanatic Brett Eckleberry. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
So we might as well dive right in. All right. So, Brett, last time you were on the podcast, I gave you a super easy question.
Yes.
No more.
I appreciated it.
Yeah. No more Batman questions for you, senor. This time, but it's actually still sort of an easy one. We're talking about the Rings of Power, of course. Most of our audience is pretty familiar with the original Peter Jackson movies. We are definitely very familiar with them. So I want to know, in those movies, and if you have to go to The Hobbit, we can go to The Hobbit, what is your very, very favorite scene in any of those movies?
Well, this is a very difficult question, but in a different way because there are so many to
So
choose
many,
from.
yeah.
I will avoid The Hobbit and I will stick to Lord of the Rings for this question. I think that my favorite scene, the scene that I will just pop up on YouTube and just watch on its own, the most often is the charge of the Rohirrim in Return of the King. So just to set the scene a little bit, the city of Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor, it's in trouble. It's under siege by Sauron's armies. Pippin and Gandalf are doing the best they can to rally Gondor's armies, but they are fighting a losing battle. All seems lost. And then a horn sounds out across the battlefield, and King Theoden and the Riders of Rohan come riding over that hill. He uncorks one of the greatest speeches, one of the most epic speeches, I think, in movie history. Mm-hmm. And then they charge into battle. Courageous, brave, to turn the tide of battle. Man, that musical score, it really swells, triumphant, and
the sun coming up over the hill. Oh my goodness!
To this day, that scene still gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, even just you talking about it gives me goosebumps. That is a great scene. Mm-hmm. I had not even thought about that. Kennedy?
Yeah, actually, my scene is not too far from Brett's. It is within the walls of Minas Tirith as it is being besieged. And it is about Gandalf and Pippin. Mm-hmm. They're trapped in Minas Tirith, and the orcs are banging on the door. And then Pippin just has this line. He says, "I never thought it would end like this." And Gandalf starts to tell him about what heaven's like. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "End? No. The journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The gray rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass, and then you see it. White shores, and beyond, a far green country under a swift sunrise." And it's such a beautiful, like, poetic
it's amazing
line.
Yeah.
And then Pippin looks at him, and he goes, "That doesn't sound so bad." And then immediately after, you hear them banging on the door again. And, like, it's this moment of, like, we're going to die. But Gandalf is sitting there and he's saying, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because things are going to be okay.
There's hope.
And like,
this world.
No matter what
happens. I watched it for this podcast. And I almost started crying because I'm like, it's such a beautiful moment of, like, juxtaposition. And just, like, it really encapsulates, I think, what a lot of Christians feel about being like, yeah, you know, in the world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, Jesus has overcome the world. Mm-hmm. And, you know, even if your life is taken from you, you'll be in heaven with God.
Yeah. That's a beautiful scene, and you did a really wonderful Sean Connery as well.
Thank you.
So, side note, do you think the listeners would mind if we just did this whole podcast with our Gandalf impression?
Oh, I think that would be great.
Bilbo Baggins
Do not think
me a conjurer.
cheap tricks.
That would be really fun. Unfortunately, I have a terrible Gandalf impression, so that won't fly, you know? I can't do that. But my scene, I'm actually going to go back 2 movies. Fellowship of the Rings, one of my very, very favorite Lord of the Rings movies. And
Top 3 for sure.
but it's the scene down in, what is that place? Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
In Khazad-dûm. Yeah, it's the scene in Khazad-dûm where they're fleeing for their lives, and the whole, just when the drums start, right? You have all these orcs surrounding them in this huge cavernous hall, and then all of a sudden they hear this boom,
Yeah.
boom, and they get terrified and they scamper away,
And even
all,
the orcs,
yeah, all the fellowship is going, what is going on? And you see Gandalf again. He closes his eyes and he says, "We need to run." That's a paraphrase. But so they run through this, and again, the score is one of the things that makes it work, right?
yes.
It just has this powerful, beating, throbbing musical score that is both terrifying and energizing all at the same time, going over these bridges. And then the big reveal, you see the Balrog come over, and then Gandalf's big moment, standing on the bridge. And you know, it's so cliche now because you see it in these memes everywhere, right? But you shall not pass. And just thinking about the coolness and terror of the Balrog, the courage of Gandalf to stand up. Oh, so cool.
Which I think that's actually a really great segue into Rings of Power. Because in that scene, Gandalf references, I wield one of the Rings of Power. I wield the Ring of Fire, and you're not going to pass.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a perfect segue into the Rings of Power series.
There you go. There you go. See, I was being very wise and I didn't even know it. So, yeah, let's dive into the Rings of Power. Obviously, we're talking about the new season. The second season is just about to be released on Prime Video. This is kind of a big deal, you know, within the TV space. It's a huge, big budget, high gloss production. But a lot of people might not be as familiar with the story as they are with, obviously, The Lord of the Rings, the core of it. So Kennedy, with that in mind, can you tell us kind of what the Rings of Power series is, where it takes place?
Yeah, so it takes place in what Tolkien describes as the Second Age. And the Second Age is predominantly described in the Silmarillion.
And The Lord of the Rings takes place in the Third Age,
Yes,
right?
in the Third Age. So the Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson movies, canonically, if you're going strictly by the timeline in the book, they take place thousands of years later. But the Second Age in itself is also a couple thousand years long. And the Amazon Rings of Power adaptation, they've kind of smushed it all together, all these major events from the Second Age, into kind of like a decade of time. So that's one of I think the biggest changes in it. But in general, what's going on is some of the more major events. You have the kingdom of Numenor, this island nation of men who are...
Which is completely gone by the time the Third Age comes
Yes,
around,
which is
right?
completely gone.
Spoiler
So,
alert.
you know, something's going to happen to this island nation. You see these kind of, in the show, you see these fragments of political turmoil starting to happen, starting to crack at the foundations. If you really want to nerd out, Aragorn is descended from those people. Anyways, though, the other main thing that's going on right now is that they are crafting these Rings of Power. That's what happened in the first season of the show. Basically, Sauron is still around, and they're looking for him because they destroyed Morgoth, who was kind of like Sauron's mentor, boss, Satan figure. And now Sauron's kind of taken that throne. And Sauron goes to Celebrimbor, who's kind of like this elven master smith. And he tells him, hey, I'm going to teach you how to make these really powerful rings that'll help. They'll give the elves a lot of power. They're going to kind of help preserve this magic that the elves kind of dwell in around Middle Earth, so that the age of the elves won't have to end. you guys can stay here as long as you want. And Celebrimbor is kind of deceived by this. Sauron kind of takes on a new disguise as this angelic creature called,
Yeah, at the beginning of the second season.
Yeah, he calls himself Anatar, which means Lord of Gifts, and he shows up and he says, "I'm going to give you these rings, just for the fun of it."
Just for the
such a
kids.
nice guy.
Yeah.
And Celebrimbor gets deceived. He makes these rings. He makes a bunch of other rings. But the main 3 that he makes are the Elven Rings of Power. And these are the 3 Elven Rings of Power. And like I said, they're really alluring to a lot of the elves because they can kind of keep the magic in their respective realms.
Right.
And you see that pretty early on in season 2. There's this whole plot of there's this magical tree that's been dying for a while. And then when they get the rings, it comes back to life. And so a lot of them are fooled into thinking, well, yeah, these are powerful. And yeah, we recognize that eventually. We recognize that Sauron made them. But they can't be bad because
Look
we
at the
are
cool
in control
stuff.
of them.
Yeah, look at what cool stuff is going on with this.
Yeah, and Sauron doesn't even have them. So we don't even need to worry about any corruption.
Never touch them.
Yeah, never touch them.
So yeah, it's a fascinating thing as we sort of open into this story because already you have this great moral dilemma, right? And I think the show does a pretty good job of forcing you to think, so what would I do with this ring? You know, because you see at the very beginning, not to get too deep into the weeds already, but at the very beginning of season 2, you see Galadriel. And you see Elrond, who we know very well from the Lord of the Rings. They're youngins here, relatively speaking. And they have some very different ideas on how to handle these rings, right? Elrond doesn't want to have anything to do with them. Galadriel says, in a very Boromir type of statement, we should use these. And, you know, we, like I said at the beginning, we sort of know where this story is going. I mean, we know that the rings are being used. Brett, did you see season 1?
I did see season 1. Yes.
How did you think it dealt with the overall world of Tolkien?
Yeah. Well, so just beautiful in how it presents the world. So seeing the island city / nation of Numenor, the mountain peaks, just diving into different aspects of Middle Earth that we haven't seen before. I thought it did an excellent job of laying that out. If I had to quibble, I would say the lines of where certain nations, peoples aren't as clearly done as it was in Lord of the Rings, where you know, oh, here's the Shire, here's Gondor, here's Rohan, right? It's not as distinguished as much, but I thought it laid it out pretty well. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, the concept of pitting Galadriel and Sauron, where Galadriel is trying to hunt down Sauron, and spoilers for season 1 here, she finds him. She doesn't realize that it's him, and they form sort of a partnership, a relationship here that I found very, very interesting in a way where in Lord of the Rings, I mean, Sauron is Sauron. He's
a bad
the big
dude,
bad.
and you know he's bad.
You know he's bad,
Yeah.
and he's just an eye on a tower, right? Personification wasn't the purpose of Sauron in the original Lord of the Rings, I would say. He was just this overarching evil force that bled into the world and affected all of these creatures and corrupted things, right? So it was very interesting to see kind of that personal touch between Galadriel and Sauron, and having him interact with others and kind of tempt them and trick them throughout season 1.
That's actually one of the things that I've really appreciated about both season 1 and what we've seen so far of season 2 is we really we quote unquote get to know Sauron, even though he's lying all the time.
Yeah.
Right. But he really, in some ways, it feels more spiritual, more scriptural in a way, because Sauron that we see here is a tempter. You know, when we see Sauron, as you say in Lord of the Rings, he's bad. If you join Sauron, you're on the bad side. That's pretty obvious. But for a lot of the characters that we meet, Galadriel, Celebrimbor, you can see his pull, you can see his charisma, you can see his arguments sort of swaying these people, and how they're using kind of some really virtuous ideas and twisting them to Sauron's own ends.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, I think the biggest theme, obviously, in Tolkien is good versus evil, and Tolkien pulls no punches in saying this is good, this is evil. But at the same time, Tolkien's not afraid to show how evil can twist something that is good into something that is evil, just with a little manipulation.
Just a little push.
And so you see characters like, I mean, you see that a little bit in Lord of the Rings with like Boromir. Who Boromir's not a bad guy. He's a good guy. And anyone who says otherwise, come see me. But Boromir, the flaw of Boromir isn't that he's evil because he wants to use this obviously evil ring. The flaw of Boromir is that he's seen the power in this ring, and he's saying, we can use this for good, not realizing that it's actually going to use him. And that's a lot of the themes that you see in The Lord of the Rings. That's a lot of the themes that we're starting to see in The Rings of Power. As the elves are looking at these elvish rings of power, which are slightly different, so we'll give them some credit for that. But I think Elrond has this very specific conversation with Círdan, and who's like one of the oldest elves at this point. He's super wise. And Círdan says something, as you mentioned with Galadriel and Boromir. He says something very Boromir-esque, where he's like, hey, well, we can use these.
Right.
We can use them, and it'll be okay.
Yeah.
It'll all pan out. Yep. You know why? Because Sauron can't touch them. And nobody knows that at that moment, Sauron is crafting a ring that actually has that ability.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how Sauron is dealt with within this particular show. One of the most fascinating things for me is in the very first episode. You have Sauron, he looks briefly, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this, since he's such the manifestation of evil, right? But there is a brief second where he seems like he is willing to go good. He's starting to have doubts about the path that he's set for himself.
Interesting.
What did you guys think about that?
Well, I would say this goes back to kind of these spiritual themes and elements that Tolkien really drew on and used to craft his story. Even though it's not straight allegory, his Christian faith really influenced what he was writing. And I know Kennedy has a specific reference, so I won't step on that, but I will say Sauron essentially is an angel or an angelic figure upon like his creation, right? And he is corrupted, almost like not quite like a Satan figure, because that would be Morgoth to get into the lore of like the big bad of the universe, but Morgoth corrupted Sauron as well as like an angelic figure that became almost kind of like this demon. So Sauron started as a good creation that was corrupted. So it is interesting to see, as we talked about in Lord of the Rings, we just see him as the personification of evil, plain and simple, right? He looks it, he acts it. But in his backstory and in the years leading up to Lord of the Rings, you can see hints of, well, maybe his original purpose comes into conflict with this new evil path that he has chosen to walk down on.
Yeah, no, actually, I think that was something that, I think if you're not familiar with the Silmarillion, you might wonder, like, are they trying to do this nuanced view of evil? Why are they making Sauron out to be misunderstood? This kind of, he's not as bad as he seems. There is a section in the Silmarillion, which is why I brought the book with me, where Tolkien references this, whether or not it was genuine, this feeling of maybe I'll repent. And so I'm going to read that real quick.
Sure.
It says, when Morgoth was overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Onwe, the herald of Manwe. And these names aren't that important. I mean, they're important, but not for these purposes.
These are like archangels kind of thing.
He abjured all of his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. And later on it goes on to say, but then he returned to his evil ways, essentially.
One of the things that I actually really love about that is that it suggests two things to me. Like, we are defined by our choices. And if Sauron had made better choices, there could have been some redemption from him. And the other thing is just that idea that no one is beyond redemption. And I think that might be one of the things that Tolkien was suggesting, is that no one is beyond the reach of God. Anybody, no matter how bad they've been, can be saved. And just to, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think he has another character in The Lord of the Rings who is exactly that mold, and that's Gollum. If you read about a lot of what he talks about Gollum, there's a moment where, if you were watching the movies, it'd be when they're climbing up that really steep slope right next to the scary green palace, Minas Ithil.
Yes.
And if you read the book in that section, there's a scene where Sam accuses Gollum of eating the rest of their food. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, that's not what he was doing. He was actually gazing fondly on Frodo for all the kindness he's shown him.
Yeah.
But Sam assumes the worst, and it says something along the lines of, in that moment, all hope of redemption and the light that was forming in Gollum's eye went away because he finally felt, no, I'll never get better because of what Sam had said to him.
Yeah.
Which is the worst moment for Samwise Gamgee.
Yeah.
But it shows that had this continued on, Gollum might have been redeemed.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, and that just shows how Tolkien presented his characters in such a realistic way, because we know Sam is like the man. Like, he is such a hero in Lord of the Rings, and yet he makes a mistake like that, assuming the worst in Gollum, when Frodo was through his kindness, was bringing that goodness back into Gollum's life. So really, he did a great job of kind of weaving that into a very heroic character, but who also makes a big mistake along the way.
Yeah, I wish we could just talk about this all day, but we do need to sort of talk, because the second season of Rings of Power, it has some great spiritual elements. I was really pleased to see how it was developing some of these really great talking points. But as you know, Kennedy, it comes with some problems. Yeah. Can you mention those problems really quick?
Yeah, so I think just purely content-wise, it's a bit more violent, and not necessarily in terms of number of people dying. Like, if you go to Helm's Deep, you'll see a lot of that.
Sure.
But they're a bit more graphic in Rings of Power. And it's not always bad, but I mean, there's a scene where this orc gets its face ripped off by a spider.
Yeah, that's not pleasant.
And there's a bit more blood, I think, as well. And so it's not something that you'd sit there and think, well, this is out of the realm of The Lord of the Rings. But then you think, well, The Lord of the Rings is kind of more fantasy, and it's not like George R.R. Martin fantasy.
Right.
It's Tolkien fantasy, which is usually a little more lighthearted most of the time. And so I think some of those violent moments can kind of take a viewer by surprise. In terms of the actual plot, honestly, it can get a little boring.
Well, there's just so much to wade through. I mean, we're talking about...
and that's why specifically.
Right. The Silmarillion is a very complex book. We've talked about it. You guys have read it, which is more than I was ever able to do. But there's a lot of characters to wade through.
Yeah, and that's, like I said, that's the biggest issue. It's not boring because the actual plots are boring. There's a couple... It's just... They've made so many characters, and
feels overstuffed.
When you try to, I understand why they did it, but when you try to smash down 2,000 years of history into a decade, and then you start to have to jump between all these extremely important characters from the Second Age, where then you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, I guess I really like Isildur and Elendil, but now I have to go watch an entire episode about Nori, who, no offense to the actress, but I just don't really care about the character, especially because she's not actually in the book whatsoever. So not only do you have all these important characters from the Second Age all stuffed together,
Nori's
then they stuffed in a few more for good
Hobbit.
measure.
Yeah, they felt like they
Nori's
needed hobbits.
And honestly, I like her, so I think you're completely wrong about that, but that's just me.
Yeah, so in general, though, the point being that they have about, in kind of in Lost fashion, the TV show, they have like 10 main characters. And so I think it's just from that format, there are some episodes where you just won't care about as much because you're like, I care about these 3 or 4. And so every time I see the other ones, I'm kind of like, okay, well, I want to get back to the other
Time
ones.
to get my popcorn.
Sure. Let me ask you guys a question because I haven't seen the first few episodes as you have. So Nori, her story, is it still intertwined with this mysterious,
Probably
Mysterious,
Gandalf.
potentially
Maybe a blue
wizardly
wizard, who knows?
stranger?
Exactly.
Is it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And her best friend sort of comes along for the ride as well. So that I find that to
Proto-Sam.
be a really interesting storyline. I'm fascinated by this mysterious bearded figure, and he has some really funny lines too. So.
Okay. All right. Well, what do you feel is the most compelling storyline, at least that you've seen so far?
Goodness, if I have to give my opinion, I love Numenor.
Yeah.
I just love the whole storyline of Numenor and the Silmarillion. It's the perfectly crafted Atlantis somewhat tragedy, you know. And so I'm a huge fan. Elendil is like probably one of my favorite characters in all of the Silmarillion, and so I'm excited every time I see him on the screen.
Awesome.
But then they just added Círdan to the screen, who is also another one of my favorite characters. So now I'm starting to waver.
All right.
So for me, honestly, I'd probably have to say the dwarves. I love
Okay.
going down underground and talking with Durin and his wife, who is fantastic. And there's a big, I won't even spoil it. There's a big crisis that's going on down underneath.
I might be able to guess, having seen some of the trailers.
Yeah.
And having Paul talked about his favorite scene from The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, I must like just underground scenes. I don't know what
you
that
you
is.
love Moria. You love Khazad Dûm.
Man, I do wish we could talk more, but we need to draw this in for a close. So thank you guys so much. And thank you, dear listener, for listening. We love connecting with you, and we're able to do that only because of your generous donations.
Yes, you bow to no one.
What sort of donations do we accept? Well, Rings of Power Untouched by Sauron's Evil Hand would be great. Mithril would be fantastic, too. If you're in the neighborhood of Rohan, feel free to ship us a horse, but we also take cash or credit. If you send us a gift of any amount, we'll be happy to send you a copy of our book, Becoming a Screen Savvy Family. You can learn how to do that by going to the Plugged In Show homepage. And please, no lembas bread.
It doesn't spoil, though.
It doesn't spoil.
That's
true.
That's like the one food you can ship through the mail.
And now we have come close to the very end of our show, which means, of course, we're playing a game. And today we are playing Name That Movie Fantasy Edition. Now, just to refresh your memory, you need to think of a description of a fantasy movie. Let us know what that movie is in a one-sentence pithy description, and we'll try to guess. And if we don't, then you win, I guess.
I'm in it to win it.
I think that's how it works. So, Brett, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Okay. So I'm pretty proud of this one. So we'll see what you guys think.
The Dark Crystal.
Well, I'll give my line anyway.
Oh, no.
He nailed it.
Are you
Wow.
kidding?
He did. Okay. Well, let me give my one-liner. Evil avian aristocrats squabble over a magical gemstone while a young hero attempts to restore order to a broken world. Paul guessed it out of hand. Wow.
I feel really terrible. I was just kidding. But
No,
man,
I think that this means that you won, Paul.
Wow.
The
wow.
Dark Crystal. Yeah, Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, which, man, it scared me as a kid. But it's really stuck with me ever since. So.
Oh, it stuck with me too. Man, that was one of the most creative movies I have ever seen, and super duper creepy.
Yeah, very
Goodness
creepy.
gracious.
I really enjoyed the reboot, the Netflix reboot that they did, or continuation, I should say.
Yeah, so
Came out
I
several
watched
years
I
ago.
watched a few episodes of that, reviewed a few episodes of it. I didn't make it all the way through. Does it work all the way through?
I think so. I really enjoyed it. So, yeah, it was cool to see even the dedication to the craft, all the puppets and everything coming back. So, yeah, it was a very unique very good experience. So,
All right.
still kind of creepy.
Yes, very creepy, very creepy. I'm going to go ahead and go next. So here it is. A boy and his granddad are introduced to the world of cutthroat business, including deep corporate secrets, a legally questionable labor force, and an incredibly unsafe workspace.
I might immediately need a hint because I'm blanking.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, a boy and his granddad are introduced to the world of cutthroat business, including deep corporate secrets, legally questionable labor force, and an incredibly unsafe workplace, including, might I say, a glass elevator.
Oh, this is Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Willy
Very
Wonka and the
good.
Chocolate
Okay.
Factory. The
For a moment, you said boy
Gene-
and his granddad, and I was just thinking Spy Kids.
Really? See, I thought Princess Bride because the granddad's reading the story
yeah,
to
yeah.
his that was
and then
immediately where my mind went. So I was stuck.
you were thinking corporate secrets. I don't remember that.
Yeah,
Inconceivable.
yeah.
Inconceivable.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. 2 school children find comfort in escaping to a fantasy realm, but a tragic twist bridges the relationship between a boy and his sister.
My guess would be Bridge to Terabithia.
Yes.
All right.
That would be very good.
Now
would be very
that-
good.
Good movie, but man, I was unready for that twist as a
Devastating.
child.
It's devastating.
Man,
I think we
oh,
watched that in school, and I was like, "What?
Yeah.
What are they showing us?"
we won't spoil it, but yeah, it's like Old Yeller in some ways. Man, it's really sad. Anyway, okay.
I can't believe you guessed mine out of hand.
I-
That's wild. Well done.
Yeah, I don't quite know. I really didn't look over your notes. I really did not. But anyway, I feel
I believe you. I'll trust you. Yeah.
I feel curiously proud of myself now. So, anyway, thank you so much for joining us on our jaunt through Middle Earth and our walk through American history today. And before this show is history, I'd like to encourage you to join in the fun. Looking forward to a new season of Rings of Power? What's your favorite fantasy story? Let us know on Instagram or Facebook, post a comment on our blog, leave us a voicemail on the Plugged In Show homepage, or send us an email to team@thepluggedinshow.com.